Hello, and welcome to Goodnight Flagstaff. My name is Cyndi Riepe, a resident of Flagstaff since 1976. I'd like to take the opportunity to wish you all a very happy new year. Hopefully you're all enjoying the snow, maybe taking a walk, playing in the snow, or shoveling, which is a nice muscle workout. Maybe all of the above. Whatever it may be, enjoy the season. And thank you for tuning in to our community story time. You can find a new chapter from one of our favorite family-friendly books at 8 p.m. each weeknight on the Literacy Center's YouTube channel and on Crater Radio, a local online radio station. The previous chapter is replayed on Crater Radio each weeknight at about 7:30. Just before the new chapter airs. You can also listen to all previous Goodnight Flagstaff recordings on YouTube. We are currently reading The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkein. If you'd like to check it out to read along with us at home, it is available at the library. Check one out today with your Coconino County library card. Please email us if you'd like to join our team of readers and connect with your community through stories. All ages are welcome. Our email is goodnightflagstaff@gmail.com. Last time we read together, Rohan began to gather their strength so they could help Gondor in the next battle. And Merry felt like he was in everyone's way. But Theoden accepted his service and made him an escort of Rohan. Then the Rangers of the North came with messages of Aragorn. After many hours of counsel, he realized he needed to take the dreaded paths of the dead. Despite his warnings, Legolas and Gimli determined to go with him. And now we begin with the remainder of Chapter 2 of Book 5. And while Theoden went by slow paths in the hills, the Grey Company passed swiftly over the plain. And on the next day in the afternoon, they came to Edoras, and there they halted, only briefly, ere they passed up the valley, and so came to Dunharrow as darkness fell. The Lady Ewan greeted them and was glad of their company, for no mightier men had she seen than Dúnedain and the fair sons of Elrond. But on Aragorn most of all her eyes rested, and when they sat at supper with her, they talked together, and she heard of all that had passed since Theoden rode away, concerning which only hasting tidings had yet reached her. And when she heard of the battle in Helm's Deep and the great slaughter of their foes, and of the charge of Theoden and his knights, then her eyes shone. But at last she said, "Lords, you are weary, and shall now go to your beds with such ease as can be contrived in haste. But tomorrow fairer housing shall be found for you." But Aragorn said, "Nay, lady, be not troubled for us. If we may lie here tonight and break for our fast tomorrow, it will be enough. For I shall ride on an errand most urgent, and with the first light of morning we must go." She smiled at him and said, "Then it was kindly done, Lord, to ride so many miles out of your way, to bring tidings to Ewan, and to speak with her in exile. Indeed, no man would count such a journey wasted," said Aragorn. "And yet, lady, I could not have come hither if it were not that the road which I must take leads me to Dunharrow." And she answered as one that likes not what is said, "Then, Lord, you are astray. For out of Harrowdale no road runs east or south, and you had best return as you came." "Nay, lady, said he, I am not astray, for I walked in this land ere you were born to grace it. There is a road out of this valley, and that road I shall take. Tomorrow I shall ride by the paths of the dead. Then she stared at him as one that is stricken, and her face blanched. And for long she spoke no more, while all sat silent. But Aragon, she said at last, is it then your errand to seek death? For that is all that you will find on that road. They do not suffer the living to pass. They may suffer me to pass, said Aragon, but at the least I will adventure it. No other road will serve. But this is madness, she said, for here are men of renown and prowess, whom you should not take into the shadows, but should lead to war, where men are needed. I beg you to remain and ride with my brother, for then all our hearts will be gladdened, and our hope be the brighter. It is not madness, lady, he answered, for I go on a path appointed, but those who follow me do so of their free will, and if they wish now to remain and ride with Rohirrim, they may do so, but I shall take the paths of the dead, alone, if needs be. Then they said no more, and they ate in silence, but her eyes were ever upon Aragon, and the others saw that she was in great torment of mind. At length they arose, and took their leave of the lady, and thanked her for her care, and went to their rest. But as Aragon came to the booth where he was to lodge with Legolas and Gimli, and his companions had gone in, there came the Lady Ewan after him and called to him. He turned and saw her as a glimmer in the night, for she was clad in white, but her eyes were on fire. Aragon, she said, why will you go on this deadly road? Because I must, he said, only so I can see any hope of doing my part in the war against Sauron. I do not choose paths of peril, Ewan. Were I to go where my heart dwells, far in the north, I would now be wandering in the fair valley of Rivendell. For a while she was silent, as if pondering what this might mean. Then suddenly she laid her hand on his arm. You are a stern lord and resolute, she said, and then do men win renown. She paused. Lord, she said, if you must go, then let me ride in your following, for I am weary of skulking in the hills and wish to face peril and battle. Your duty is with your people, he answered. Too often have I heard of duty, she cried, but I am not of the house of Errol, a shield maiden and not a dry nurse. I have waited on faltering feet long enough. Since they falter no longer, it seems, may I not now spend my life as I will? Few may do that with honor, he answered. But as for you, lady, did you not accept the charge to govern the people until their lord's return? If you had not been chosen, then some marshal or captain would have been set in the same place, and he could not ride away from his charge, were he weary of it, or no. Shall I always be chosen? She said bitterly. Shall I always be left behind when the riders depart, to mind the house while they win renown and find food and beds when they return? A time may come soon, said he, when none will return, then there will be need of valor without renown, for none shall remember the deeds that are done in the last defense of your homes, yet the deeds will not be less valiant because they are unpraised. And she answered, all your words are but to say, you are a woman, and your part is in the house. But when the men have died in battle and honor, you have leave to be burned in the house, for the men will need it no more. But I am of the house of J.R.R, and not a serving woman. I can ride and wield blade, and I do not fear either pain or death. What do you fear, lady? He asked. A cage, she said, to stay behind bars until use and old age accept them, and all chance of doing great deeds is gone beyond recall or desire. And yet you counseled me not to adventure on the road that I had chosen, because it is perilous. So may one counsel another, she said. Yet I do not bid you flee from peril, but to ride to battle, where your sword may win renown and victory. I would not see a thing that is high and excellent cast away needlessly. Nor would I, he said. Therefore I say to you, lady, stay, for you have no errand to the south. Neither have those who go with thee. They go only because they would not be parted from thee, because they love thee. Then she turned and vanished into the night. With the light of day was come into the sky, but the sun was not yet risen above the high ridges in the east. Aragorn made ready to depart. His company was all mounted, and he was about to leap into the saddle when Lady Ewan came to bid them farewell. She was clad as a rider, and girt with a sword. In her hand she bore a cup, and she set it to her lips, and drank a little, wishing them good speed. And then she gave the cup to Aragorn, and he drank, and he said, Farewell, Lady of Rohan. I drink to the fortunes of your house, and of you, and of all your people. Say to your brother, beyond the shadows we may meet again. Then it seemed to Gimli and Legolas, who were nearby, that she wept, and in one so stern and proud that seemed the more grievous. But she said, Aragorn, wilt thou go? I will, he said. Then wilt thou not let me ride with this company, as I have asked? I will not, lady, he said, for that I could not grant without leave of the king and of your brother, and they will not return until tomorrow. But I count now every hour, indeed every minute. Farewell. Then she fell on her knees, saying, I beg thee. Nay, lady, he said, and taking her by the hand, he raised her. Then he kissed her hand, and sprang into the saddle, and rode away, and did not look back. And only those who knew him well, and were near to him, saw the pain that he bore. But Ewan stood still as a figure carven in stone, her hands clenched at her sides, and she watched them until they passed into the shadows under the black Dimorberg, the haunted mountain, in which was the door of the dead. When they were lost to view, she turned, stumbling as one that is blind, and went back to her lodging. But none of her folk saw this parting, for they hid themselves in fear, and would not come forth until the day was up and the reckless strangers were gone. And some said, They are elfish wits. Let them go where they belong, into the dark places, and never return. The times are evil enough." The light was still gray as they rode, for the sun had not yet climbed over the black ridges of the haunted mountain before them. A dread fell on them, even as they passed between the lines of ancient stones, and so came to the dim hole. There, under the gloom of black trees that not even Legolas could long endure, they found a hollow place opening at the mountain's root, and right in their path stood a single mighty stone, like a finger of doom. "My blood runs chill," said Gimli, but the others were silent, and his voice fell dead on the dank fir needles at his feet. The horses would not pass the threatening stone until the riders dismounted and led them about. And so they came at last deep into the glen, and there stood a sheer wall of rock, and in the wall the dark door gaped before them like the mouth of night. Signs and figures were carved upon its wide arc, too dim to read, and fear flowed from it like a gray vapor. The company halted, and there was not a heart among them that did not quail, unless it were the heart of Legolas, of the elves, for whom the ghosts of men have no terror. "This is an evil door," said Halbarad, "and my death lies beyond it. I will dare to pass it nonetheless, but no horse will enter." "But we must go in, and therefore the horses too must go," said Aragorn. "For if ever we come through this darkness, many leagues lie beyond, and every hour that is lost there will bring the triumph of Sauron near. Follow me." Then Aragorn led the way, and such was the strength of his will in that hour that all Dudain and their horses followed him. And indeed, the love that the horses of the rangers bore for their riders was so great that they were willing to face even the terror of the door if their masters' hearts were steady as they walked beside them. But Arad, the horse of Rohan, refused the way, and he stood sweating and trembling in a fear that was grievous to see. Then Legolas laid his hand on his eyes and sang some words that went soft in the gloom, until he suffered himself to be led, and Legolas passed in. And there stood Gimli, the dwarf, left all alone. His knees shook, and he was wroth with himself. "Here is a thing unheard of," he said. "An elf will go underground, and a dwarf dare not." With that, he plunged in, but it seemed to him that he dragged his feet like lead over the threshold. And at once a blindness came upon him, even upon Gimli, Gowen's son, who had walked unafraid in many deep places of the world. Aragorn had brought torches from Dunharrow, and now he went ahead, bearing one aloft, and Eladon went another at the rear, and Gimli, stumbling behind, strove to overtake him. He could see nothing but the dim flame of the torches, but if the company halted, there seemed an endless whisper of voices all about him, a murmur of words in no tongue that he had ever heard before. Nothing assailed the company, nor withstood their passage, and yet steadily fear grew on the dwarf as he went on, most of all because he knew now that there could be no turning back. All the paths behind were thronged by an unseen host that followed in the dark. Some time unreckoned passed, until Gimli saw a sight that he was ever afterwards loath to recall. The road was wide as far as he could judge, but now the company came suddenly into a great empty space, and there were no longer any walls upon either side. The dread was so heavy on him that he could hardly walk. Away to the left, something glittered in the doom as Aragorn's torch grew near. Then Aragorn halted and went to look what it might be. "Does he feel no fear?" muttered the dwarf. In any other cave, Gimli, Goin's son, would have been the first to run to the gleam of gold, but not here. Let it lie. Nonetheless, he drew near and saw Aragorn kneeling, while Elladan held aloft four torches. Before him were the bones of a mighty man. He had been clad in mail, and still his harness lay there whole, for the cavern's air was as dry as dust, and his hauberk was gilded. His belt was of gold and garnets, and rich with gold was the helm upon his bony head, face downward on the floor. He had fallen near the fall wall of the cave, as now could be seen, and before him stood a stony door closed fast. His finger bones were still clawing at the cracks. A notched and broken sword lay by him, as if he had hewn at the rock in his last despair. Aragorn did not touch him, but after gazing silently for a while, he rose and sighed. "Hither shall the flowers of Calimbul come never into the world's inn," he murmured. "9 mounds and 7 there are now green with grass, and through all the long years he has lain at the door, though he could not unlock. Whither does it lead? Why would he pass? None shall ever know. For that is not my errand," he cried, turning back and speaking to the whispering darkness behind. "Keep your hoards and your secrets hidden in the accursed years, Speed only when we ask. Let us pass and then come. I summon you to the stone of Eric." There was no answer, unless it were an utter silence, more dreadful than the whispers before. And then a chill blast came in, which the torches flickered and went out, and could not be rekindled. Of the time that followed, 1 hour or many, Gimli remembered a little. The others pressed on, but he was ever hindmost, pursued by a groping horror that seemed always just about to seize him, and a rumor came after him like the shadow sound of many feet. He stumbled on until he was crawling like a beast on the ground, and felt that he could endure no more. He must either find an ending, an escape, or run back in madness to meet the following fear. Suddenly, he heard the tinkle of water, a sound hard and clear as a stone falling into a dream of dark shadow. Light grew, and lo, the company passed through another gateway, high arched and broad, and a reel ran out beside them, and beyond, going steeply down, was a road between sheer cliffs, knife-edged against the sky far above. So deep and narrow was that chasm that the sky was dark, and in it small stars glinted. Yet, as Gimli after learned, it was still 2 hours ere sunset of the day on which they had set out from Dunharrow. though for all that he could then tell, it might have been twilight in some later year or in some other world. The company now mounted again, and Gimli returned to Legolas. They rode in file, and evening came on, and a deep blue dusk and still fear pursued them. Legolas, turning to speak to Gimli, looked back, and the dwarf saw before his face the glitter in the elves' bright eyes. Behind them rode Elladan, last of the company, but not the last of those that took the downward road. "The dead are following," said Legolas. "I see shapes of men and of horses, and pale banners like shreds of cloud, and spears like winter thickets on a misty night. The dead are following. Yes, the dead ride behind. They have been summoned," said Elladan. The company came at last out of the ravine as suddenly as if they had issued from a crack in a wall, and there lay the uplands of a great vale before them, and the stream beside them went down with a cold voice over many falls. "Where in Middle-earth are we?" said Gimli, and Elladan answered, "We have descended from the uprising of the Morthon, the long chill river that flows at last to the sea that washes the walls of Dal Amath. You will need to ask hereafter how comes its name. Black Root men call it." The Morthon Val made a great bay that beat up against the sheer southern faces of the mountains. Its steep slopes were grass-grown, but all was gray in that hour, for the sun had gone, and far below lights twinkled in the homes of men. The vale was rich, and many folk dwelt there. Then, without turning, Aragorn cried aloud so that all could hear, "Friends, forget your weariness. Ride now, ride. We must come to the stone of Yerrick ere this day passes, and long still is the way." So without looking back, they rode the mountain fields till they came to a bridge over the growing torrent, and found a road that went down into the land. Lights went out in house and hamlet as they came, and doors were shut, and folk that were afield cried in terror and ran wild like hunted deer. Ever those rose the same cry in the gathering night, "The King of the Dead, the King of the Dead is come upon us." Bells were ringing far below, and all men fled before the face of Aragorn. But the Grey Company in their haste rode like hunters until their horses were stumbling with weariness. And thus, just ere midnight, and in a darkness as black as the caverns in the mountains, they came at last to the hill of Erech. Long had the terror of the dead lain upon that hill, and upon the empty fields about it. For upon the top stood a black stone, round as a great globe, the height of a man, though its half was buried in the ground. Unearthly it looked, as though it had fallen from the sky, as some believed. But those who remembered still the lore of Westerness told that it had been brought out of the ruin by Númenor, and there sat by Isildur at his landing. None of the people of the valley dared to approach it, nor would they dwell near, for they said that it was a trysting place of the shadow men, and there they would gather in times of fear, thronging round the stone and whispering. To that stone the company came, and halted in the dead of night. Then Elrahir gave to Aragon a silver horn, and he blew upon it, and it seemed to those that stood near that they heard a sound of answering horns, as if it was an echo in deep caves far away. No other sound they heard, and yet they were aware of a great host gathered all about the hill on which they stood, and a chill wind like the breath of ghosts came down from the mountains. But Aragon dismounted, and standing by the stone, he cried in a great voice, "Oath breakers, why have ye come?" And a voice was heard out of the night that answered him as if from far away, "To fulfill our oath and have peace." Then Aragon said, "The hour is come at last. Now I go to Pelargir upon Anduin, and ye shall come after me. And when all this land is clean of the servants of Sauron, I will hold the oath fulfilled, and ye shall have peace and depart forever. For I am Elisar, Isildur's heir of Gondor." And with that he bade Halbarad unfurl the great standard which he had brought, and behold, it was black, and if there was any device upon it, it was hidden in the darkness. Then there was silence, and not a whisper nor a sigh was heard again all the long night. The company camped beside the stone, but they slept little, because of the dread of the shadows that hedged them round. But when the dawn came, cold and pale, Aragon rose at once, and he led the company forth upon the journey of greatest haste and weariness that any among them had known, save he alone, and only his will held them to go on. No other mortal men could have endured it, none but the Dúnedain of the north, and with them Gimli the dwarf and Legolas of the elves. They passed Tarlaing's neck and came into Limdon, and the shadow host pressed behind, and fear went on before them, until they came to Calambel upon Ciril, and the sun went down like blood behind Penethgalen, away in the west behind them. The township and the fords of Ciril they found deserted, for many men had gone away to war, and all that were left fled to the hills at the rumor of the coming of the king of the dead. But the next day there came no dawn, and the grey company passed on into the darkness of the storm of Mordor, and were lost to mortal sight, but the dead followed them. Thank you for tuning in, and join us next time for Chapter 3 in Book 5, in The Return of the King. Good night.